Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good Thursday evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It is the 18th of May, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. You can do that easily by giving us a call on the Alaska Weather Information Line, 1-800-472-0391. Find us online at weather.gov/Alaska. Click on the map and you'll be taken to your nearest weather forecast office that serves your community more locally, like Fairbanks, Juneau, or Anchorage. You can learn more about the National Tsunami Warning Center in Palmer, Alaska. Even find out when they're doing their tours. I think they're still once a week. Pretty awesome place if you've never been. And learn more about the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit that serves many of your general aviation weather needs across the region. And if you ever have a question about what you're looking for, make sure you send us an email or just pick up the phone and call. nws.ar.tvweather@noaa.gov is a great way to reach the TV desk team. All of us are happy to help you anytime. If you'd like to just reach me personally with something about the show, a concern, a gripe, or hey, you really like the show tonight, let me know. david.snyder@noaa.gov. We'd love to hear from you anytime. Now, as far as breakup goes, things have been easing in and out of the season very, very easily so far, and we've been very lucky. It's been more of a mush out than anything else. No major problems to report. As you can see, we're using this dark blue color here. That means conditions are open all the way from the upper Tanana, the upper Yukon, all the way down to the lower and middle Yukon, and of course the upper and lower Kuskokwim. And now we're starting to focus on some of the more northern rivers there. The Colville is still locked up, and it looks like the Kobuk and Noatak are starting to see some of the changes there. The Koyukuk also looking A-OK. So, wow, kind of easy this year. We like that, right? Hopefully you're doing well where you are along your river. Here's a look at fire danger. Things are starting to change a little bit in the drier side of the season here, but it really hasn't been that dry. Across South Central, we've had a lot of clouds and rain on and off for the last week or so in different spots. It hasn't been all concentrated in one spot, but still, places are sneaking out with a little bit of dry weather and just enough of a concern, but barely so, in places like the central interior, around Fairbanks, around Gulkana, and around Skagway, that we're adding them to the map here as elevated, if not high, fire danger. No threat for extreme fire danger in the near future, and if this weather trend continues, well, I'm not going to say it just yet, but we can always hope that it's an easier fire season. Here's a look at the satellite picture now. The infrared satellite picture is what you're looking at, and you can see the overall circulation with low pressure around Kodiak Island. If you look carefully, you can see how there's a pretty large trough carved out all the way around the Bering Sea and all the way around Alaska. There's an upper level low pressure system and a wave sitting right over Alaska, and it's carving out a lot of the weather here. So it's keeping things unsettled across the Gulf. It's allowing colder air to move through the Bering Strait, even freezing spray possible across the Chukchi coast as the waters are opening up there now. And it is going to guide in some sizable amounts of moisture towards southeastern Alaska as we get into Friday night and Saturday. We'll start to see that taking shape. As we get into Saturday night and Sunday, it's probably going to rain an awful lot in southeast. The question is, how much awful lot? You know it gets wet in southeast. We know it rains more frequently than any other place. But when we're starting to talking about, higher amounts of rainfall, that starts to get people's attention. So we're going to need to watch this carefully. If you're in southeastern Alaska and too much rain is a problem for you, you're going to want to pay attention to the weather as we get into Saturday night and Sunday. You're not going to see it on our maps tonight, but make sure you check back in tomorrow and make sure you're checking the forecast from weather.gov/Juneau. Here's a look at the visible satellite picture, and you can see across the interior there has been quite a bit of clear skies in and between some of the puffy afternoon clouds that have developed in the heat of the day. Didn't see but one strike across the upper Kuskokwim earlier today around McGrath. Not a whole lot of thunderstorm activity late this afternoon. Still room for one or two more strikes this afternoon, but doesn't look like it's going to be very widespread. The next couple days could be a little bit different, but an isolated to a widely scattered range of storms across the central and eastern interior and maybe as far west as the upper Kuskokwim once again. Looking out across the Gulf again with a visible satellite picture, you can see there's some breaks in the clouds across the Bering Sea coast for the eastern Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula. And as air is blowing off of south and western Alaska, that's pushing some of that drier air out to sea. And still, St. Paul had visibilities down to about 2 to 3, maybe 4 miles this afternoon. St. George looked pretty good at 10 miles, but just to the west, a whole mess of fog and low clouds and stratus there from St. Matthew all the way out toward Shemya. And low clouds keeping things fairly murky across Barrow and the North Slope today. In fact, there was some snow around the Chukchi coast. Didn't look to be a whole lot. It usually isn't. But areas of low clouds and snowflakes will persist across the North Slope. Conditions looked a little bit better. Slightly higher ceilings around the Beaufort Sea coast today. And if you moved inland just a bit, the temperature shot way up, as it usually does. Next to the coast, we were talking about temperatures in the 20s and 30s. Away from the coast, readings were back in the lower 40s as you moved upriver. Pretty impressive stuff. But that's enough to keep the clouds and the murk right there across the North Slope, while everyone else is in the 40s, the 50s, 60s, and maybe getting close to 70 degrees again across the eastern interior. Rain was falling around Prince William Sound today, the Kenai Peninsula and the Anchorage region. Most of that seemed fairly light, but at times it was persistent. And we had some showers popping up in the heat of the day, again around the upper Kuskokwim, and once again maybe a lightning strike or two. High pressure will sit out across the western Bering Sea at 1,013 millibars. That's going to keep that low cloud cover across the western Bering for the next several days. Areas of fog and a few drops and drizzles out there. Showers across the eastern chain, the Alaska Peninsula, and into Bristol Bay. The rain could be a little more steady as we get into the afternoon and evening. And all along the Gulf Coast, that moisture is starting to fill back in. It's coming up out of the northern Pacific and through the central and eastern Gulf. And with high pressure across southeastern Alaska and the southern channels, as well as the Dixon entrance, it's helping to kind of bring that up in a conveyor belt of moisture slowly filling its way in. You'll still see showers as we get into Friday. Across the interior, a little bit of sunshine could make a little bit of a storm cloud, 1 or 2, maybe 3 here and there. A few showers across the Yukon Valley. With the heat of the day again, those will pop up a little bit more. So not wall-to-wall washout with rainfall here. This is just a hit-and-miss showers across the region. Up north, still cold enough for some flurries and some fog with low pressure across areas in the western Beaufort Sea, as well as just offshore of Barrow there. We expect to see that colder air filtering in. High pressures up to the north, and of course that northerly wind coming down the Chukchi coast is also making its way through the Bering Strait. And in those regions, it wouldn't be a surprise to see a little bit of freezing spray if the wind is strong enough. Low pressure across the YK Delta, also adding a little bit of moisture in to the lowlands there and into the upper Kuskokwim. Out to the west, some low clouds, areas of light rain and drizzle, and some of that perhaps sneaking closer and closer to St. Paul and St. George. For the central and eastern chain, some light rain and drizzle certainly possible there, and showers will continue around south central, the Matanuska and Susitna valleys, including the Anchorage region tomorrow. It does not look like we just instantly move this moisture out of town. So we get into Saturday, it should be a slightly drier day around south central. A better chance of showers will be west of the inlet and across the western Gulf into Prince William Sound. We might see some clouds bubble up over the mountains, but as far as Anchorage, Palmer, Wasilla, and maybe even Kenai, should be a slightly drier day. A look out west, though, shows the weather's already changing. 973 millibar low working across the western Bering will encourage the winds to switch around in places like Shemya and Kiska by the afternoon. And here's the weather maker for southeast. A warm slug of air is also bringing a decent amount of moisture into the central and eastern Gulf. And this is just kind of the beginning surge of this. There's a lot more where this came from. So by Saturday night, we certainly expect to see rainfall in the region. It will probably start out as showers and gradually turn over to drizzle and then maybe some steadier rainfall as this begins to move in. But as this system moves its way east and north, the focus for rain will pretty much stay right here on southeastern Alaska. So we need to keep watch on this once again, as there could be a persistent and perhaps a heavy period of rainfall for southeast once we get into Saturday night and Sunday morning. So pay attention to the weather again in southeast. Widely scattered showers and thunderstorms may be possible across the Yukon Valley as we get into Saturday. A little bit drier air will allow for a little more sunshine in the morning and a slightly better return on the shower and thunderstorm development in the afternoon as a result of that morning sun. So changes coming there, and showers once again possible around southwest, Lake Iliamna, Bristol Bay, and perhaps all the way down to Port Heiden and Pilot Point for Saturday. Temperatures today, not roasting anywhere. 40s and 50s is what we saw across most of the Panhandle. Lower 50s as you get down toward Petersburg, Wrangell. 61, one of the warmer temps there around Hyder late this afternoon. Close to 50 around Sitka. Capital City, cool and 48. 50 around Yakutat, 48 for Cordova and Valdez. 54 up around Palmer this afternoon. Struggling to reach 50 degrees by 3 o'clock in Anchorage today. That's what the clouds will do this time of the year. 51 around Homer and 45 in Seward. Around Fairbanks, it was a milder 63. Healy was 52. Fort Greely had just shy of 60 there. 63 around Eagle and 61 around Northway up the road toward, actually that'd be Northway 67. I believe Tok was 61. Fort Yukon was 64 degrees as you get up toward AKwx Pass. Cooler, 45. But then look what happened as you went down the slope toward the north coast. You got down toward 28 degrees as you get up toward Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse, and 30 degrees around Kaktovik, 30 in Barrow, 31 in Wainwright. Kotzebue Sound temperatures at or just above freezing today. Nome was in the 40s, just barely. Galena had 56, again with a nice mush out of the river this year. And 57 around McGrath, again with a little bit of a lightning strike there. As you get out toward the YK Delta, temps were in the 40s and 50s. Bethel had 54, 40s around Dillingham today, 55 around King Salmon, 40s around the Alaska Peninsula with Sandpoint at 45, Dutch Harbor in Unalaska 48, 39 around St. Paul with areas of fog and some low clouds throughout the day, and 41 in St. George. It was warmer for both Adak and Atka, almost at 50 degrees really, and considerably cooler out at Shemya. So a lot of variation where you are. Here's a look at the temperatures tonight, and you'll see most readings in the upper 30s and lower 40s around the lowlands in the Yukon Valley and Kuskokwim Valley. Southwest, you're closer to 40 degrees, 30s for the Alaska Peninsula. Southeast in the mid-40s, south central, lower to mid-40s. Around Prince William Sound, a little bit colder, closer to 39. The North Slope in the upper 20s, most areas still below freezing there. And the Seward Peninsula, as well as the Shishmaref, Kotzebue, will be at or just below freezing tonight. St. Lawrence, 31. High temperatures there tomorrow, up to 35 around Gamble and Savunga. Mid-60s, one of your warmer temperatures from Fairbanks all the way up to Fort Yukon at 67. South Central in the mid to upper 50s, 45 around Kodiak, lower to mid-50s for Southeast. You can see that warmth building back in ahead of the rainfall. And upper 20s for most of the North Slope. The Seward Peninsula, again, cool on the north, 35 around Shishmaref and Kotzebue, and 52 in Nome, 40 in St. Paul and around St. George, and mid to upper 40s for the Alaska Peninsula and the Aleutian Chain. On to flying weather. IFR conditions will continue across the northern Gulf Coast, staying away from southeast in the morning, but you do get a taste of MVFR. IFR conditions on the southern end of Kodiak Island and across the central and western chain, with MVFR conditions continuing for the North Slope, a large part of Norton Sound and southwestern Alaska, including Bristol Bay. For the daytime tomorrow, conditions will improve out west, with IFR staying just south of the Aleutians. MVFR from the Bering Strait all the way through the Pribilofs, Nunivak Island, Bristol Bay, but not quite up to Bethel tomorrow afternoon. IFR conditions expected around Prince William Sound and south toward Yakutat. But again, not making its way into southeast with improving visibility for the central and southern part of the Panhandle. MVFR lingers across the Beaufort Seacoast to about Wainwright, so plan on that. And Aktivik Pass, we expect to see showers in the region, but it looks like VFR for you to start and end tomorrow. Adigan Pass may suffer from that a little bit more. MVFR through the afternoon. Showers in the region with clouds building up for Lake Clark and Merrill Pass. MVFR through the day. Same goes for Rainy Pass. Marginal conditions prevail there. Look for some improvement around Windy Pass. VFR conditions through the day, and also for Isabel Pass. Looking for VFR through most of your Friday. Mentasta Pass, we expect to start at MVFR in the morning. And the afternoon, probably seeing more showers around Tanita Pass with MVFR conditions developing there. Portage Pass looks to be IFR. Once you get through the pass on the eastern side, the rain and the low clouds should linger in the region through a large part of the day. And Chilkoot and White Pass will stay MVFR with improving conditions well to the south. Here's a look at freezing levels, and you'll notice that cold air is trying to be pushed further and further northward. 2,000-foot freezing line very close to Nome and just to the west, and also with the Beaufort Seacoast. Conditions warm up even more as you head south and east toward places like Eagle. And then across southern parts of southeast, you can see levels climbing up as high as 8,000 feet. Across south central, much cooler air here, and all the way across the Alaska Peninsula and the eastern chain with levels even below 2,000 feet. The surface freezing line hovering very close to the Brooks Range right now and the Wrangell-St. Elias region. Icing potential will stay above 1,000 feet for anything substantial, light to isolated moderate across the far eastern Beaufort Seacoast, across the Alaska Range, southwestern Alaska and Bristol Bay, Kenai Peninsula, and the northern Gulf Coast. We'll see levels above 6,000 feet to get into the light to isolated moderate there. Remember how we were looking at the jet stream and we had that big trough and we were talking about it was really mostly off the screen. Well, this is the expanded view, and you can see this trough clearly here, cutting all the way across the North Pacific and then taking a quick rise to the north, pumping a lot of moisture with it right into southeastern Alaska and allowing that process to continue all the way across the hemisphere almost, and then working its way southward across the Rockies. This pattern is creating snow in the central Rockies around Colorado. This is creating mild but wet weather across parts of the Gulf and eventually southeast, and keeping conditions a little bit unsettled across south central, while mild across the interior and cold across the north. That pattern will continue for the next couple days. 9,000 feet, we've got our southerly flow working its way into southeastern Alaska. Winds here around 20 to 30 knots or so. Again, from the south, light winds across south central. A little bit more of an east to westerly flow across the southern Alaska range, and southwesterlies working across the northern interior and the north slope, about 20 to 25. High pressures in charge across the western Bering, and it's keeping winds fairly light. That's where we saw all the fog in the stratus a little while ago in the satellite picture. For the central and eastern chain, winds running around 10 to as strong as 35 knots just south of the chain. At 3,000 feet, winds are a little bit more broad from the 20 to 40 knot range from east to west. Light winds across the central and northern Bering Sea. We have northerlies working their way through the Kotzebue Sound region and then bending off to the west, helping to keep that cold air funneled into the northern Bering. And then we get back into our southerlies there, 10 to 25 knots, increasing as you move off the Beaufort Seacoast. Light winds for the interior right now. Here's our southerly winds helping to push moisture northward into the northern Gulf at 3,000 feet. And at southeast, we're looking at very light winds across central and southern parts of the inner channels for tomorrow. So what about turbulence? Really hit and miss. Doesn't look like anything terribly substantial, but there will be some faster moving winds through the Bering Strait and probably at least the western half of St. Lawrence Island below 4,000 feet. Watch for some chop there. Also around the eastern and southern sections of Norton Sound, some wind coming out of the interior may speed up a little bit, could get a little bit choppy, and after you get into areas just south of Bethel, out toward the coast and Cape Newenham, below 4,000 feet, a little bit of a yoke rattling there, as well as areas around the Barren Islands below 4,000 feet. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back with the rest of your marine weather here in just a few minutes.
Three months until the big one.
Hey there, stargazers. I'm Dean Regas, astronomer for the Cincinnati Observatory.
And I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Pla Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida. We're here to help you find your way around the sky. There will be a lot of exciting astronomical events to experience in 2017.
That's right, James, but the main event, the thing I've been waiting my whole adult life to see, is the big one. On August 21st, 2017, we'll have a total solar eclipse crossing the United States.
This is the best astronomical event you will ever see. Better than a lunar eclipse, better than a comet, even better than...
No, don't say it, don't say it.
Better than a planetary conjunction.
Yeah, it's true. When the moon completely blocks out the sun, this is something you cannot miss. We have 3 months to go, so we thought we'd get you prepared for... the big one. First, let's talk safety. You don't want to mess around with staring at the sun. You need the right equipment to view the partial stages of the eclipse when only part of the sun is blocked by the moon.
If even a little sliver of the sun is showing, you need eye protection. The cheapest and easiest method is to use eclipse shades or number 14 welder's glasses. These have such dark lenses in them that it's safe to look at the sun through them. Just make sure your eyes are covered whenever you're looking.
Do not use regular sunglasses, CDs, film negatives, smoke glass, foil wrappers, or mylar balloons. They will not protect you. Use the good stuff. You can find eclipse glasses and number 14 welder's glass online for a few bucks, but shop early before they sell out. Looking good, James.
Who said that? You could make a pinhole camera as well. Let the sun shine through a hole in a piece of paper onto the ground and you can make an image of the sun.
You may also see the sunlight coming through leaves onto the ground in a weird way. During really strong partial solar eclipses, the leaves act like lots of pinhole cameras. Okay, on to the main event. This is what will happen on August 21st if you're viewing from most places in the country.
The moon will slowly slide between us and the sun and eclipse more and more of it. Everywhere in the U.S. will experience a partial solar eclipse. But to see the total solar eclipse, you'll have to be on a specific 75-mile wide path from Oregon to South Carolina.
Just before totality, you will see what's called the diamond ring. It's the last rays of sunlight poking around the mountains of the moon. A moment later, whoosh, it will look like the sun is gone. There will be a perfect black hole with the wispy atmosphere of the sun, called the corona, still shining. At this point, you can actually look at it without any glasses, because you're really looking at the moon.
Look around you because the light will be so weird. The bright stars will come out and the temperature will plummet.
Take it all in. We haven't had a total solar eclipse in the mainland United States since 1979.
But totality won't last long. After a little more than 2 minutes, the sun will peak around the moon again. When the diamond ring returns, you'll have to put your eclipse glasses back on, and then you can watch the rest of the partial stages.
It's really quick.
But totally awesome.
So, you have 3 months to prepare for the total solar eclipse. Get your eclipse or welder's glasses early.
Now, we know that not everyone lives on the path where the total solar eclipse will be happening.
And we also know this is going to happen on a Monday, so that means you may need to play hooky from work or school to see the big one.
To find out where the total solar eclipse will be visible, check out the Stargazer's website for a link to NASA's eclipse page, and you can plan your route.
Don't settle for an 80% or 90% eclipse. That's only 10% of the experience. A total solar eclipse is something you will never forget. Keep looking up.
The sea ice edge continues to move further and further northward. A pretty large polynya is shaped up across the Chukchi coast, and open water now is seen north of Little Diomede and the Bering Strait, so conditions continue to mush out at sea almost as much as they've mushed out on land this year with our rivers. Norton Sound is seeing more and more open water. Again, generally low ice conditions and low concentrations, not quite ice-free yet. But watch for more changes, and they'll continue to happen just as fast. Here's a look at southeast, and southeasterly winds will be blowing into the southern inner channels, about 10 to 15 knots, 2 to 3 foot seas. There's stronger winds developing in the afternoon tomorrow around Haines and Skagway, 20 knots with a 4-foot sea north of Juneau. And then across the outer coast, 10 to 15 knots from the south, about 6 to 7 foot seas expected there on Friday. For your Saturday, we'll get into more of a south and easterly flow. And remember, that's wrapping around that low pressure system that's moving closer to the Gulf. A 10 to 15 knot wind coming up to the inner channels will keep seas generally small, 2 to 3 feet there. On the outer coast, you're talking about 6 to 8 feet with the 8-foot seas outside of the Dixon Entrance region. For south central, generally light winds inside of Prince William Sound tomorrow. Easterlies 15 knots with a 3-foot sea, 5 to 7-foot seas across the north and western Gulf Coast, 15 to 25 knots there with some of the higher winds and higher seas outside of the Barrens and Kodiak Island. Northeasterlies inside of Shelikof Strait with an 8-foot sea, and light winds across the southern and northern ends of the Cook Inlet region, 10 knots with a 2-foot sea there. Stronger winds just south toward the Barren Islands, of course. Northeasterlies coming down Cook Inlet on Saturday, building up a little bit more west of the Barrens and into Shelikof Strait, 4 to 5-foot seas there. Northeasterlies still light inside of Prince William Sound, and a broad easterly flow moving across the Gulf, 20 knots with seas ranging from 6 to 7 feet on Saturday. For the Bristol Bay, southeasterlies 15 knots with a 2-foot sea. Light winds also continue down the Bering Sea coast, 15 to 25 to the Pacific coast with a 6 to 7-foot sea there on Friday. As you get into Saturday, winds pick up just a little bit more, 20 knots with a 6 to 7-foot sea. Light winds inside of Bristol Bay and down the Bering Sea coast running around 15 knots for the beginning of your weekend. For the central and eastern chain, 15 knots, looks like 3 to 4-foot seas on the Bering side, 6 to 7-foot seas for the Pacific side. More of a northerly flow west of Adak toward Shemya. 15 knots with a 5 to 6 foot sea expected there on Friday. As we get into Saturday, you'll notice that southwesterly wind picking up, the system out to the west starting to pull in some of the warmer and wetter air there. 25 to 30, 7 to as high as 13 feet in the western Aleutians with 15 knots across the Bering Sea coast. It looks like more of a north and easterly wind across the Pacific coast with 8 to 9 foot seas there on Saturday. For the west coast, winds will be generally light, but the flow will be cold. Northerlies across the St. Lawrence Island, 3 foot seas there. A light and generally variable flow around the Pribilovs out toward Nunivak Island. That's going to keep those low clouds around. If they're there, they're going to stay there. Northerlies around the Kuskokwim Delta, 10 knots with a 2 foot sea. Becoming easterly, 15 knots with a 2 foot sea as you get into Saturday. Southeasterlies around St. Matthew with seas up to 3 feet around St. Lawrence Island on a 15 knot wind out of the Bering Strait and from the north. For the north coast, look for northwesterlies around Barrow. Freezing spray is possible there on a 20 knot wind. As you get down toward the west, watch for areas to break up. That may be possible there. And look for a south and westerly flow across the Beaufort Sea coast and then across the Chukchi coast, a 10 to 15 knot wind, 2 to 3 foot seas there. Again, any open water could easily create some freezing spray in the region. North and easterlies from Point Lay down toward Cape Lisburne and Kotzebue Sound looking at 10 to 15 knots, and north and westerlies across the Beaufort Sea coast, 10 to 15 knots as you get into your Saturday. Let's recap tonight's weather. Across the region, showers are more likely than anything else. We've seen a lightning strike or two this afternoon, but not a whole lot to write home about. Up north, it's still cold enough for rain and snow to mix around the north coast. East toward the Beaufort Sea coast, temperatures may be just warm enough for that to be mostly liquid at this point. Light rain, drizzle, and a few showers passing through south central and southwestern Bristol Bay, and a few showers around the central and northern parts of southeast with the heat of the day. Generally dry weather for southeast for the next day or so with some afternoon showers around, but conditions will be changing as we get into Saturday night and Sunday with moisture developing across the central Gulf and blowing in towards southeast and focusing there for the next several days there from Saturday night onward. Widely scattered showers or thunderstorms may develop across the lower, middle, and upper Yukon Valley as we get into your Friday. For Saturday, you can see similar conditions across the interior. Slightly drier weather around Anchorage, the Matanuska and Susitna Valleys, south of Kenai. A better chance for some lighter rainfall again there on Saturday. And southeast starts to get into that wetter period we're talking about as you get into Saturday night and Sunday. So pay attention to the changing weather conditions and the forecast there. Out west, a new Bering Sea storm develops with a 973 low out to the west. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather. See you again here tomorrow.
These forecasts are to be used for